Hello again, and welcome to Chapter 2 of Carl Jung's The Red Book. This chapter is called Soul and God, and it begins with Jung calling out to his soul for a second night. And he talks about how he found his soul where he least expected it, much like the Bible verse at the beginning of the book that talked about how the divine comes from unknown places. It comes from the streams that come forth in the desert. How it comes from the deaf who can hear. And so he states this again, and he also notes that the soul had announced itself to Jung in his dreams. This is the second occurrence of Jung talking about his dreams. The first one, he talked about the visions of the flood that he had and how it really marked the beginning of this path into the depths in the second half of his life. And what his dreams did was they pushed Jung to act boldly, to rise above himself, and to see new truths, and to undertake great journeys that were dangerous, that his soul helped him through. Jung states that his speech and himself, he says, "My speech and I are the symbol and expression of the soul." So he seems to fully come to terms with the idea that the soul is something having a human experience, and that the soul is what is protruding through Jung. And he sees it as a symbol of the soul, which is really interesting because we tend to see symbols as something man-made or created or artificial, something that stands for something else. Well, in this case, he sees his personhood or his being, being Carl Jung, being J.T. Leber. This is an expression, and it's the soul. I am a symbol of the soul, which is really interesting because it puts the soul as primary, and it's the soul as having a physical experience. Jung states that my dreams represented you as a child and as a maiden. And so once again we see the idea of soul, of God being a child, of being exactly where you wouldn't expect it, of being something small, innocent, yet something all-powerful. And this is the first time synchronicity, or the idea of synchronicity, comes forth in this work. Synchronicity is a term that Jung coined that has to do with coincidence that's not exactly coincidence. So it's when things occur almost at a deeper level, random occurrences, things that seem like they could be random, that we would explain as random. Jung and synchronicity say that no, these things are manifestations of our intuition, of spirit, or of something deeper that's working beneath the surface. So the idea, just a basic synchronistic event would be, you're thinking hard about someone that maybe you haven't thought of in a long time, and they call you on the phone. That would be a synchronistic event. And there are lots of those other kinds of examples. And I'm sure you've had many yourself if you stop to think about it. And so what he writes, where his first kind of the first indication of the idea of synchronicity comes from, is he writes, "I went on the way of the day." And he's talking to a soul here. "I went on the way of the day, and you went invisibly with me, putting the pieces together meaningfully, and letting me see the whole in each part." So even though Jung says he was going through his day-to-day, and he's referring to before he refound his soul and reconnected, that the soul was in the background, providing pathways, and was providing the pieces that connected this larger schematic, this larger whole. And it's interesting, as we set goals and move towards our objectives in life, and if we do it with a certain conviction and a certain belief, which Jung talks about a little bit later, that his soul allowed him to always believe in himself. And that was a great help in overcoming all of the obstacles on his way. And as you believe in yourself, and you believe in your goals and that you will accomplish them, things seem to work out serendipitously. Things seem to just happen by chance almost, that encounter with that person that you've needed to talk with. You find something just pops out in an advertisement or a billboard or anywhere that just fulfills the need that you were putting out to the world. You mention it, you talk to a friend, and they happen to know the exact person that you need to speak with. And that's synchronicity, and that's what Jung's alluding to here very lightly, but the idea that the soul is behind those events, and it's putting the pieces together meaningfully, and in a way in which each part comes to continue and fulfill the whole. Jung also goes a little bit deeper into dreams. It's the first time he really talks about it in a significant manner. He says that, and I have it written here, dreams are the guiding words of the soul. Why should I henceforth not love my dreams and not make their riddling images into objects of my daily consideration? So right away, Jung has this real connection with his dreams and the images that are there. And he goes on to say that the spirit of the depths even taught me to consider my action and my decision as dependent on my dreams. Dreams pave the way for life, and they determine you without you understanding their language. So dreams, they pave the way for life. So dreams serve as a way not only, and this is where it differs from a lot of materialist points of views. A lot of materialists, or it's even common for everyday people to say that dreams are merely the random firings or the processings of the contents of your brain which you have accumulated throughout your day and throughout your life, and maybe even things that have come before you. So it's residue. It's like this clearing away. There might not be anything to it. It's a bunch of random images and things going on. That's the one perspective on dreams. But Jung here is already stating that he sees dreams as the soul. He sees dreams as the words of the soul. Personally, I think he's right. That it paves the way forward. So dreams can be a means to moving into the future, moving onward with your life. Dreams can give you guidance. Dreams can show you how to overcome obstacles, which is a lot different than merely being the residue or the processing of previously held information. Jung is here making the supposition that dreams can actually be a guiding force in one's life into the future, and that dreams are the domain of the soul. So the soul can help us move and guide us through our paths as we journey forward. Another interesting part is where Jung says that we might not understand the dream's language, and he goes on to say that scholarliness is not enough, that there is a knowledge of the heart that gives deeper insights. And here he's alluding to the idea that our knowledge cannot necessarily interpret dreams the proper way. One of the things that I learned starting to work with dreams was to throw away your dream dictionary. That should be your first step. If you have one, yeah, it's kind of interesting, but it's not serving you. Because our soul and our dreams speak to us in our own language. And what that means is that an image, even though it may be archetypical, or it may be something common, may not mean to you in your dream what it may mean to a vast majority of others. And so, one example would be like a snake. A snake in one person's dream, or the vast majority of people's dreams, would not mean the same thing to somebody who was what's the word for snake care person, heptologist. If they were to dream of a snake, it would have a very different meaning than if you or I had a dream of a snake. And so the important thing is with dreams is they're individual, and that we have to take the time to interpret our own images, that the outward knowledge of images and their meanings becomes largely useless. One of the things that we're taught learning about kind of modern day dream interpretations and being a dream teacher is to always begin, when you help somebody through their dream interpreting, is to always begin with, well, if this were my dream, then this is how I would see it. Because you never want to assume that certain images mean the same thing to another person. And I believe it was Jung who said this. I do believe I read that Jung said that if his interpretation of one of his client's dreams did not resonate with that client, or the client did not agree with his interpretation, then it was obviously the wrong interpretation. And they would need to find something where, the ideas matched and that things felt congruent. So, throw away your dream dictionaries. They're no good, useless. Trash them. So, as Jung encourages us to set aside scholarliness, that the path is different from learnt knowledge in that form, he tells us that there's a knowledge of the heart. Now, how do we obtain that knowledge of the heart? It's by living your life to the full. And you do this, Jung says, by living what you have never yet lived, but have left for others to live or to think. So the idea is to push forward, to be a creator, to step outside your boundaries, to push your boundaries, to go further than you've been before. Not to sit on the sidelines and think, well, that's for other people to do or other people to think about. No, that's your prerogative. That's where your growth is. That's where you live the fullest, is by pushing forward and going for it, right? If you don't do this, then you're fleeing from yourself, and you can never reach the knowledge of the heart. Can never reach the knowledge of the heart. It reminds me of patience, because I think patience has two different forms, and I think the New Age movement really does a disservice to people, because people who are suffering and hurting, they encourage them to be patient, but what they're really telling them to do is just don't do anything and just trust that everything's going to happen for you. But what Jung here is saying is the exact opposite, is that you need to go forward. You need to push your boundaries. You need to create new. You need to live your life to the fullest, which means doing those things that you haven't done before. And there is an endless amount of things to do. This is a constant process of going forward. Now, where real patience comes in is when you have a goal and you set forward towards that, and you're okay with not having the results right away, because you have trust, belief, and patience that they are coming. But it's no longer a virtue to be patient when you're downtrodden, when you're depressed. It's not a virtue to wait and hope and just merely think that things will get better. You have to take action. And you have to push yourself to your boundaries. I think this is a good place to talk about the picture that was at the beginning. It's a drop case S, as you can see here. And we have the white dove and the black snake on both sides of the S. And you have the tree here on the side. And this is, you could actually, if you look at it, you could probably interpose right over that picture the yin-yang symbol. Because you have the white dove and you have the black serpent with the curvy S that kind of lines up perfectly with the way the yin yang does that sort of S shape. And the yin yang represents the difference, or the, well, it's complicated, but it represents meaning and it represents a way of being that sees both chaos and order. And so you have the snake, which is the chaos, and you have the dove representing maybe order and freedom and fresh beginnings. You have the one flying, the one on the ground. And so these contrasts are here. And together, these contrasts show that the edge of life, the very edge between chaos and order, is where we need to be. And that's exactly where you have your fullest life. It's where you get your fill, is in that balance between those two. So I think that's really, really interesting. To continue onward, talking about the knowledge of the heart, Jung writes, "The knowledge of your heart is how your heart is. From a cunning heart, you will know cunning. From a good heart, you will know goodness. So that your understanding becomes perfect, consider that your heart is both good and evil. You ask, what? Should I also live evil? The spirit of the depths demands, the life that you could still live, you should live. Well-being decides, not your well-being, not the well-being of the others, but only well-being." So again, here's him, an encouragement, and this is straight from the depths again, that whatever is in your heart, whatever is, and you have to look at it. If your heart has love, if your heart has goodness, then that is the heart you'll know. If your heart has cunning, jealousy, evil, then that's the heart you must know. And it seems so counterintuitive. It seems wrong because we want to avoid that and deny it. That's exactly what we have to step into. That's exactly where we have to go. And so it's not an encouragement towards evil, but it is an encouragement to live your life fully. And if those things are in your heart, well, you have to understand them. And so you have to take stock, you have to take account, you have to go into them and see what that is. And he gives kind of an encouragement saying that, well, ultimately it's well-being. You know, that you got to push forward, but the well-being will decide. So it's like this well-being, he's talking about it as though it's something a little bit deeper, and it's not your well-being, and it's not for the well-being of others, but this well-being in general that you'll find there. And maybe that's to say that if you go into your heart and you see snakes, and you see hatred, well, that's how you address it, and that's how you clear it out. And maybe that's the way well-being can finally come forth. Moving on, Jung says that the spirit of the depths taught me to say, I am the servant of a child. Through this dictum, I learn above all the most extreme humility as what I most need. Continuing, the spirit of this time, of course, allowed me to believe in my reason. He let me see myself in the image of a leader with ripe thoughts. But the spirit of the depths teaches me that I am a servant, in fact, the servant of a child. This dictum was repugnant to me, and I hated it. But I had to recognize and accept that my soul is a child, and that my God in my soul is a child. So again, we return to the image of God as a child, as God who holds everything in his hand, as a child. It's right where you least expect it. And I know that's something that I've said a lot, but it's really fascinating that the God that we need and the God that we have and God himself is where we are not. It's where we don't expect it. And so the innocence of a child, and another thing is children don't have reason the way adults do. So those who engender and those who give birth are the ones who create a future for God. They see the divine child in the radiant cradle.
Okay, I found this on the web for divine child. Check it out.
Siri seems to have an opinion. So he continues, he who still has his life before him is a child. He who lives life in the present is developed. If you thus live all that you can live, you are developed. He who is a child in this time, his God dies. He who is developed in this time, his God continues to live. And so there we see that the one who has life before him is the child, and the person who lives in the present is the one who is developed. So again, it's the child looking forward to being something, right? To becoming something. And it's the developed that's in the present, creating, not putting it off, not separated from it through time. The developed one also lives all that they can live. They push forward, they push the boundaries, they create, they step into the unknown where they haven't been before. And the spirit of the depths teaches this mystery. Prosperous and woeful are those whose God is developed. Prosperous and woeful are those whose God is a child. What is better, that man has life ahead of him, or that God does? I have no answer. I know no answer. Live, the unavoidable decides. So it's really fascinating that the God, for those whose God is developed, and for those whose God is a child, they are both prosperous and woeful. They are both happy and sad. They will both experience their joy and they will experience their grief. It reminds me of in the prologue when Jung talked about how many people, although there is light, they also need the shadow to grow in. Much like plants, right? They need the shadow. And in the same way, it doesn't matter if your God's developed or as a child, if you grow in the shadows or in the light. There's joy to be had and there's sorrow to be had. That's just the conditions of life and living for everybody. Joy and sorrow, woe and prosperity. What is better, that man has life ahead of him or that God does? And so that's the real question and the difference here between the childlike being who is looking forward to his life forward, to what he will become, versus the person who is living their life fullest and is developed because they have the divine child in his radiant cradle that they're raising up, that they're bringing forward. And so they're ensuring that their God has an existence, that God will live moving forward. The spirit of the depths taught me that my life is encompassed by the divine child. From his hand everything unexpected came to me, everything living. This child is what I feel as an eternally springing youth in me. Well, the divine child has everything. And the divine child, when you are encompassed by the divine child, you have the fountain of youth, the eternally springing youth, because you are always creating, you're giving birth to divinity, and then you have the divine child that you are working to have a future for him. Because that's what children do, they grow. Children are potential. And so the idea that our divinity is a potential, and that it's always in a childlike state, means that we always have to provide, that we always need to push forward and create new, better ways for this child. And that is a source of eternal, endless energy. The fountain of youth, maybe. In childish men, you feel the hopeless transience. All that you saw passing is yet to come for him. His future is full of transience. But the transience of the things coming towards you has never yet experienced a human meaning. So in childish men, they feel hopeless transience. So they feel the hopelessness of a world just passing them by, of things that they're not creating. They have fleeting desires. They want this thing, but as soon as they get it, they want another thing. And it's just this movement of desires that just go by, it just kind of floats with the wind. And so that's all they have. Their future is full of that. That's all they have to look forward to, is just more of the same, of things coming and going, much on a whim, not to their own creation. But for you, the transience of the things coming towards you is yet to have been experienced. And has yet to have had human meaning. So that means that you are creating. You are on the leading edge of this life, of this living life. You are the one who is bringing forth meaning to the temporal. Even though the thing you might be giving birth to, the thing you might be creating or working with, might be transient in its nature. It will go and pass. But you are on the leading edge of living that. You are thinking it, you are feeling it, you are living it. It's not coming to you, but you are putting it forth. You're continuing to live is a living onward. You engender and give birth to what is to come, you are fecund, you live onward. The childish is unfruitful. What is to come to him is what already has been engendered and already withered. It does not live onward. And so that's the main distinction there. Are you going to be a creator, or are you going to be a second-hand person? Will you be like the child who looks forward into the future, hoping to become this and that? Or will you be somebody who engenders, is fruitful, and creates, and rises the divine child up from the ground upward? And that's your choice. But one lives onward and one does not. Jung goes on and kind of in conclusion towards the end of this chapter, he writes, you should mock yourself and rise above this. And he's talking about here, kind of the strange things that he has to do. And this, when you live on the edge, you risk being mocked and ridiculed. You risk being questioned by your own self, your conscious. May question what you're doing, because you're going into unexplored territory. But you have to rise above that. So he says, you should mock yourself and rise above this. If you have still not learned this from the old holy books, then go there, drink the blood and eat the flesh of him who was mocked and tormented for the sake of our sins, so that you totally become his nature. Deny his being apart from you. You should be he himself, not Christians, but Christ. Otherwise, you will be of no use to the coming God. Then a little later, he says, no one can be spared the way of Christ, since this way leads to what is to come. You should all become Christ. So that's really interesting. Not Christians, but Christ. And who was Christ? Christ was the divine child. Christ was the Son of God. Christ was the human being through whom divinity came forth in its fullest, most lived expression. And that is what we must be. And the way of Christ was full of humility. He was the one who was mocked. And that's what Jung's encouraging us to do. He's encouraging us to be the divine child and to have the divine child as our God, and to see our fruits of our labor, and to see the things that we work for, that we create, to come forth, and to live dangerously, to live forward, to step into the things that we haven't been before, to think the thoughts we've never thought before, to not put it off for somebody else to do them, but to step into it ourselves. Because that is the path and that is the way. Lastly, Jung states, you do not overcome the old teaching through doing less, but through doing more. And again, he's encouraging us to live life to the fullest, to do the things we've never done, to think the thoughts we've never thought. And as he stated earlier, it's in this way that we actually gain the knowledge of our hearts. It's by living life to the fullest. And in the previous chapter, he talked about that was the one thing that he learned when he was away from his soul. Maybe not the only thing, but the one thing that he really took away and kept was that one must live this life. And it was through living this life that the depth spoke to Jung. And it was through living this life that he looks to continue to nurture the image of the divine child. The idea that he is somebody who can engender and give birth and raise and create a future for that divinity. Not just working to obtain that in the future as a child would. As a child would think about becoming an adult. As a childish man may think about pursuing enlightenment or something, or having a certain status of power. It's childish. What's important is what you're creating and what you're passing on and the future that you're creating. So that brings us to an end here of chapter 2, Soul and God. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. And yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying the series. Looking forward to upgrading my audio here soon and maybe doing things in a little different format. Although the material is very, very dense, so it's going to be hard for me to condense it. But yeah, looking forward to it. So until next time, goodbye.